This is The Real Gig with Bret Alexander.
Nyke Van Wyk, back again.
Sir Bret Alexander.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
It was a good chat we had there.
It was. Yeah. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Basically, today, I just want to talk about this episode. I just want to talk about kind of artistically. Mm-hmm. You know, we talked about last time we talked about how you got to where you are, and kind of the whole journey of learning how to play and playing with all these different formats and classical orchestras and bands and blah blah blah. Yeah. And up to now, working with us. Yeah, and so I just today I want to just talk about the artistically. Like if you're working on a session or you're playing at a gig, kind of what's going through your head and the way you try to fit in what you do with all these various situations that you do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I'll like let's say you do this thing. Let's start with this. You do this thing. I'll back up for a second. First session I ever did with you was with Scott McKenna.
Scott McKenna, yeah.
And you were just playing violin on his record. And I remember you being very good. You were kind of quiet. You didn't say a lot, not like you are now, not the jovial young man you are now.
Still very young.
Yeah. And but I remember you being quiet, a real good player and all that. But then the second time you came in, you had developed this whole sort of build orchestras from scratch.
Actually, that was something we were kind of developing in the moment. So that was all history in the making with you.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I remember you coming in and like, this is a thing too, is like people that want string sections or whatever, oftentimes for those that don't know this, most people do, they would use, there's like patches on synthesizers, and you maybe, especially if you have somebody that's an arranger that understands how orchestras work and understands how parts are built and, like a section, they know how to do that.
Yeah.
Then they can use a synthesizer or use like a sample or something like that and build these parts one at a time. And when I first started working here, I've mentioned on other podcasts, the guy Bill Grabowski was like he had a amount of training, and he had like an old. This is in the 80s, This is like he had one of those emulator 2s. I don't know if that's even something you would have even heard of.
EMU 2s, yeah.
EMU 2s. Yeah, the emulator, and it ran on floppy disks.
Yep.
And you had to wait like 2 minutes for a sound to load up. It would go in there and it would be, yep. And then I was just amazed by it because he could have these little orchestras in his head,
to develop, yeah.
And he could kind of build these little parts, and you'd have an orchestra, but it was played on a keyboard. It wasn't acoustic instruments.
Yeah.
So, in your case, only person I know that does this. I'm sure other people do, but we would just, once again, like a rock band, like we could just kind of sit in here and go, wouldn't it be cool if we went, no, whatever,
develop a
and then we can just develop a part, like it was like there was 6. First chair violin, there was like 6 violins sitting here, and then we can kind of go down the line and build viola parts and cellos.
Yeah, absolutely.
And talk about how you came up with that and how you do it.
Yeah, I think I started experimenting in high school with Finale, which is a notation software.
Yeah,
for those who don't know. Yeah, and I was starting to get into the world of I like writing, I was messing around with a guitar. I wasn't a guitarist, but I started writing some songs, and I was like, well, I know how to write, violin lines, and hopefully I can figure out the rest of the orchestra. I've been in orchestras for a while. So I got my hands on, we'll say, Finale 2004,
Mm-hmm.
We'll just say it was back in the days of like Napster and.
Sure. So you found it. Yeah. You found it online.
So, but yeah, at that point it was like $600 for the software, and to high school kids, $600 was everything. But that aside, started messing around with kind of creating, music. I had gotten into a MIDI class in high school, which was great because I don't even know too many schools that offer MIDI as a class or any kind of composition as part of like an extracurricular, not extracurricular, but an elective in the school day. So I just fallen in love with the idea of MIDI, where I could play notes on a keyboard and it would dictate it into notation right in front of me or into a graph. Yeah. And I wanted the software. So I got the software, and I ended up learning how to compose, literally dragging one note at a time onto a staff. So I'd have to go over, get a quarter note, and then if I wanted like an A, I'd have to put it on a staff as an A. And then if I wanted to change to a half note. So I just started messing around with that. And then Scott and I were working together, Scott McKenna, and he had put out an album in the past that I came on, the one that you're referring to, the first one. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I just came in and played some violin lines, and we'd started playing out together, and we were both very green at that point. And, he hired you guys, he wrote some songs and had you guys kind of fill in as the full band element and work with you guys at Saturation Acres. And I came in and just had some ideas for the songs that we had played in the past, and a couple that we'd never played for, and just kind of put down some solos. And it was fun. It was a great experience. And fast forward, like you said, we came back the next time, and Scott and I had been playing with each other for a couple of years, and we'd even been doing some small U.S. tours with colleges and whatnot. And we had been playing all these songs and writing them. He would do the significant portion of writing, and I would come in and write my parts. And we wrote the song called So Far. And
that one.
Yep. And that was where I was like, every other track we had done on that record was literally just like a solo violin, or I would play lines that would complement the song. When we got to So Far, I was like, I just hear this as a string section. I wanted to do something bigger. So in my mind, I wrote that all out using Finale and wrote out every single part. So that way I came in almost like an orchestra would, and I knew all of the parts ahead of time, and I saw it there. The only thing I forgot to do, if you remember, was print it out on paper.
Yeah. So you had a laptop.
Oh, I had this old Dell that was a laptop, and all of a sudden the fan would spool up, and I had laptops sitting in front of me, and what we realized was, if we track that so many times, that fan is going to, as you knew inherently, that fan is going to multiply because it's on so many tracks. We were doing 6 tracks of each take to make it sound like an orchestra. So inevitably what I did was I put the laptop in front of me, read, a certain section of the song, learned it, took the laptop outside. Memorized it, because it was cold, so I could put the laptop outside to cool off, while I then recorded that part and then just did the next part, third part, fourth, all the way down to 6 tracks. Then went outside, grabbed the laptop, brought it in, learned the next part, took it back outside. Yep.
And cooled it down.
Yep. So
I remember you doing that.
Yeah. So that was my first attempt at doing that. And then later I was like, why don't I just create the parts on the spot, on the top of my head, versus like, I really still to this day, I listen back to it sometimes, and there's probably some things I would, if I could, modernize it or change it. But I thought it was a great sound and a great part. But we got into the world where you're talking about, instead of just being like reading the notes on the page, which we were talking about in our last session, where I could work with you or the artist and say, here's what I'm thinking. And sometimes that thought wouldn't necessarily materialize until we have the other parts involved, because it could either be straight octaves, or we create the harmonies, or a 4-part orchestra section. So it's like, here's what I'm thinking, just trust me and go with it. And then sometimes it's like we get through it and it'll be like, yeah, it's nice, but it's not what we were thinking. We want something either more simple or something that follows the beat. So it's nice to get that immediate feedback.
Yeah.
Instead of me just coming in with an entire polished piece ready to go, and then
notated and all.
Yep. And then if somebody went, oh, well, I like this, but I don't like that part, now I have to scratch all that work that I just did. So it's funny, when I work with you, 90% of the time, I don't know what the song is that we're recording until I'm sitting in the studio with you.
Right.
And even when I work with other studios, sometimes I have people say, hey, do you want me to send the track ahead of time? And I go, you can, but I almost prefer not to hear it, because I don't want to get like something stuck in my head that now I feel married to, that when it's like, oh, well, we like this, but can we change something here? And then my mind is just locked into what I had. So then I can just kind of adapt in the moment and change it. And then my mind goes to the orchestra parts and thinking, okay, here's the chord, obviously you got this, your 3rd and 5th is usually the first place to go with creating something, but you can create tension and move parts around and try something. And then you have that initial, the part, if you will, like if it's a violin 1-line or a violin 2-line, if we're thinking orchestra or a viola or a cello, it's like, I'll lay that part down, and then how can I build off of that with you? And sometimes we just kind of go back and forth and be like, what if we put this interval on top, or what if we change it? And that's where it's also really nice, because then I get a lot of insight to, I have my own thought process of where I think those chords should, or the stack of parts should be. And then sometimes you throw out a different tone to me and I'll be like, I didn't think of that. And throw it. So,
and you can collaborate on it like pre-production or like, or like, once again, like a rock band learning a song.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Where you don't think of that in terms of an orchestral situation.
No, it's the same as like, if you send the drummer in to record, and I'm not a drummer in any aspect, but like you go, oh, I like that beat, but can we do a halftime here or something like that? Then the drummer's like, okay, cool, let me switch up gears, and they put that in there, and that changes the whole feel then and there. So where I think if you hired out somebody who, you know, wrote the parts out, and now you're talking again, unless you got somebody who can work really quick on the spot, which I'm sure there's guys out there, but now you have to change gears 1,000%.
Yeah, and it's like that just that whole like clubhouse kind of thing that it's just kind of working it out, you know, just like that clubhouse feel, you know, what do you think? What do you think?
Yep.
You know what I mean? And that's just that kind of sense of sort of just playing, you know, just kind of making it up. It's like being in the sandbox or something, you know?
Yeah.
And that's the way these things are developed. And it's funny to do it that way because the end result is so grandiose.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, because sometimes we might have 30, 36, 40 some parts.
Yeah.
On a song.
On one song, yeah. And it's funny because most of it comes from, I can't tell you, there's countless times where you and I are just sitting in the control room listening to something, and I pull up the violin, I go, what do you think about doing this? Cool, I like it. Let's go put it in. And I'll go into the other room
and play it 6 times.
Yep. And then on the spot, I'll come up with a harmony, or you'll have something in mind, and then come back in. Oh, okay, that sounds cool. Where do we go from here?
Right.
Well, let's try this.
You know, and I remember that one time we were doing it with Joe Burke on that one song.
Oh yeah.
I think the song was Pavement.
Yep.
And I was like, it's like whatever time at night, and it's pretty late, and we've been at it a long time, and you're like, I got it. We can do this. And I'm like, man.
We had already had a full day
session. Yeah, well, it's going to be another 6 hours. It's going to be, maybe we should come back. And she's like, no, give me an hour and a half.
Yep.
And it was just like, you know, and then it was like this thing.
Sometimes,
you know?
it's already in your head and you kind of know it. And it's funny because if I remember correctly, even in that moment, you know, I could see it in your eyes. It was like, oh man, we've been here. It's the end of the day and everything else. But that's not even the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is as we're in it, I see your head and your mind like clicking, going, oh, I know what we're doing. Cool, let's do it. All right, here goes another one. And it's just like,
yeah, once you get into it,
yeah, we've locked into it so often that it's like, and again, like you said, the clubhouse, like we've worked together enough times. You know, I'm just like, you know, that thing we did here, cool, or on the record, that's what I'm gonna do right now, boom, boom, boom. And you know how I like, you know, the setup for when I record with, you know, how I like things in my ear, and it ripped by. But if you know what's in your head versus like, had I tried to sit down and notate that all, it would have been another, you know, couple hours just doing that versus like, just put me in the booth, man. Let's go.
Send me in.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm saying that's like incredibly valuable. Like, I mean, if you read or watch like anything about like the Motown or the Wrecking Crew, or like sometimes
Beat Factory and those guys,
yeah, like a lot of times, or Muscle Shoals, or these like legendary studios from decades ago, and you know. There's certainly, in some cases, like the Wrecking Crew and stuff, and like Beach Boys, and there'd be like orchestral elements that would be charted.
Yeah.
You know, but a lot of that stuff, like the Motown stuff, is just, you know, just a room full of guys, you know, and you know, and here's the song.
Yeah.
And then they just do that day in and day out.
Yeah.
And like, but like to add that element of like, okay, here's the song, then here's an orchestra.
Yeah.
You know, here's a string orchestra, 40 tracks.
And honestly, most of the time you don't see that is because if you are composing for an orchestra, usually you're handing it over to 30, 40 guys playing versus just like go in there and do it. You know what I mean?
I mean, to me, that's like so, for me over time has been so valuable, and I've used you so many times on so many things.
Oh, well, I appreciate every time.
Yeah, just because because it's like, it's just like, you just can't do that. I mean, it's just like, it gives you like another thing in your toolbox as a producer or a songwriter that you can have that would cost, I don't even know, even to get somebody sort of competent enough of a small orchestra to do that could record, play in time, play in tune, in a good enough room to record them.
You had told me once upon a time that you had and we won't name names, but you had like a quartet or a small ensemble.
Yeah, I told that in another podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, they laughed at me when they saw the chart
because they thought it was simple.
It was too simple.
But then as soon as you put it to element, like
and you know that. I mean, because like you're playing with a click track, you're playing with something like a static, like something that's in tune. Yeah, you know what I mean. That there's no wiggle room. Yeah, on a rock track or a pop track. It can't be all over the place. It's got to feel good.
Yeah, it's got to be. Well, there's another. Well, back to Mr. Priskintis. Yeah. You know, the one thing I hated in the moment, and it goes back to, you know, when I'd mentioned you had to do taped evaluations each week. He would say, here's the section of music you'd have to rehearse, right? And you have to put an audio recorder down, like a tape recorder. And he goes, I want to hear the click in the background. So he wants to hear, in his words, I want to hear the metronome. So he'd say, this is the speed that we have to play it at. And wants to hear the metronome going back and forth. And I can't tell, I think I broke a bow once because I got so pissed at the metronome because it was just so wrong. Yeah. And I just took the bow and I watched the metronome go. Yeah, I think it's still bent to this day. I love that metronome today. But anyway, I hated it at the time. I hated it because I was just like, I want to play it the way I want to play it. But it's like, that's certainly something you're confined to is time in that situation, in a lot of situations, honestly. But we said before with improv and everything, you want to know your skills. You want to know your, you know, the notes on the fingerboard, you know, you want to be inside and out, but that all goes out the window too if you can't play it in time. So you need to lock yourself to a metronome and be able to play to a click and learn how to play behind it.
What I tell, you know, like be out in front of it or be behind it. Yeah. I tell people, like if I'm working with a young band or somebody that's new to the studio process, I'll often say, like, if you're not used to playing with a click, here's not the place to learn.
Right. Absolutely.
You know what I mean? So I would rather let it freewheel and let you guys do something that feels good, that you can kind of, you know, feel in your chest, like, and have it be loose. Yeah. Than try to make you conform to something you're not ready to conform to.
Yeah, because then it almost feels canned and then you can't keep into it. Yeah.
But so much of music now is so based on that static tempo.
Now it's almost like we need the opposite. We need people to learn how to
not play to it.
Yeah. Like have it there, but don't be so. I remember, we'll bring Paul Smith into the conversation. I remember when he was teaching at Susquehanna, I came over to do what we do. We were building string tracks, and you know, he was teaching future recording engineers, and I made the mistake of saying, not necessarily the mistake in some people's eyes, but or in ears, but I said, okay, cool. When we do that, you can actually move this so it fits on the clock or on the bar on the click, right? And we can cut that out and move it around so that way we can take, you know, a chorus and fly it to another chorus. And I was like, if you do that, it'll be. And he stopped me. He's like, no, we're not going to make it so it's perfect on the beat, right? He says we could still fly it, but if you make everything sound perfect, you know, like if I go in there and especially today's recording software, you know, you can flex audio, or I forget what it's called in Pro Tools, but you can make everything line up perfectly on a grid.
Beat detect?
Yeah, but basically, like, you know, it shows you the grid. So you're gridding everything. So that way, you know, if my violin is a little ahead or a little behind, it moves it exactly where it needs to be. And that's one of the worst things you can do for building a string section also. Like, obviously you don't want to be all over the place timing, but if you think about an orchestra, the way that we rock it, it's like we could tune every line to be perfect on pitch and move everything to be exactly the same on the grid as far as time goes. But then it loses that human element, which makes an orchestra sounds like an orchestra. Because if you think about it, even if you have, you know, let's say 10 guys per section, so you got 40 guys, right? All 10 guys in violin one section are playing different instruments that all have different characteristics and different tonality and timbre to them. And they all play slightly differently, even though they're playing the same notes in the same time, you know, and one might hit a little bit ahead of the other. And that chorused effect that you get is what gives that big, luscious, you know, kind of fat sound of an orchestra. So does it sound perfect when you put everything together on a grid and timed? Yeah, but then it also kind of loses that big, old time orchestra kind of sound.
Right,
too.
that sway to it that just like a live performance has.
Yep, and especially if you're using like one violin, one physical violin to do all those parts, then everything really almost sounds like you're just amplifying because you're putting one on top of the other versus getting those different types of characters in there.
Yeah, that's one thing we don't do when we do that. Is like we don't get crazy with
switching violins out and whatever.
Well, not even switching violins. Sometimes we'll have you back up a little bit or something like that, or we'll do, we'll go about it a little bit differently. But for the most part, it's like we don't get crazy about editing after the fact.
Right.
We just kind of
once it's there, it's there.
Once it's there, it's there, and you just kind of, unless there's something that's not lining up or not working.
Yeah, or something's rubbing wrong with
just so it feels live, or it feels like there's actually 6 players playing.
Yep.
Part 1.
Yeah, and I'll even say in that, for anybody who does try to go down this road, whether it's a violin or otherwise, I do try to differ each part slightly. Like one has more vibrato than the other, or I change the bow if it's like a long hold. A lot of times in an orchestra, if you have like a long hold of the same note, a lot of times the bows all change at different positions as long as you're, again, in the classical world, if the next note is a down bow, everybody lands on a down bow.
Yeah.
But so I try to make it so that way if I'm holding a long note, the bows aren't all changing in the same point, because otherwise you'll hear a break when the bows all move if you have 6 violins all moving at the same time, where you want it to sound like a drone going across. So that was the only point I was going to add.
Yeah.
There, is try to differ them a little bit each.
Just when you're putting it together, but like it's just such a valuable tool in the studio to have you be able to do that. I mean, I couldn't even venture a guess how many times, how many tracks we've done over time. I mean,
individual tracks.
Individual tracks or individual songs.
Yeah,
individual
absolutely.
songs. It all kind of started from you with that laptop, taking it out and throwing it out in the snow.
Yeah,
it's cool now. So that's a really. It's just, I mean, it's unique, it's valuable, and everybody hire him.
No, I appreciate that
to do this because it's great.
Thank you.
Okay, so like if we were to moving from there, that was kind of the first thing. We were moving over to just like a regular session or something. I play you a song. Mm-hmm. What's your thought process?
So a couple things. If you're playing me a song and it already has like a motif or a hook or something in there that I can play off of, a lot of times I'll look at it and go, okay, let me either learn that motif or harmonize to it and let it kind of become, not necessarily, it doesn't have to be prominent, but featured in different points in the song. Some of which you come for. I love and I reference this song a lot, but Life is Beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that you came in and showed me the song. You're like, I had this little Beatley-ish kind of vibe. And it was the high E line. I'm trying to think.
Is that that?
Yep.
That part.
Yep.
Actually, that's I kind of stole that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the Beatles. It was actually it was "Sweet Thing" by Van Morrison.
Yeah.
If you listen to that,
I know what you're talking about now.
Yeah. I mean, it's not exact, but it's the same vibe.
Well, and going on that also too, I remember you telling me years ago that I'll start it because you'll verbatim verses, but a good musician borrows, a great musician steals.
I didn't say that,
No.
I didn't make that up.
So
I don't know who said that originally, but that's the truth.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think there's a certain amount of like, and I find this a lot with really good players. I think that there's like a sense of like, I play something and it's kind of, this just comes out of me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And this just comes out of me, and this is, and most of the time that's probably the right thing.
Right.
Fairly early on. Sometimes you have to work, and sometimes you don't get it, and then you get frustrated, and you go home, and you come back, and then you get it right away.
Yeah.
But like whatever it is you're working on. But I think that there's something to be said for that. Like somebody like Neil Young. Neil Young reputedly. Not repeatedly. Like basically, allegedly.
Allegedly.
He doesn't edit his songs.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't. Like he just figures, these songs come from the source, and
once it's on, it's on.
And once it comes to me,
Yeah.
I just put it out there kind of, I don't really edit them.
Yeah.
And, it certainly has worked for him.
Yeah.
And I think that there is something to be said for that kind of, just that thing that comes out of you. Then you can kind of massage it a little bit and pull it into focus from like wherever you want it to go and how you want it to fit in.
Yeah.
But the problem is sometimes, okay, you come up, you just kind of like, I hear this song, I hear this part, I play the part, and I'm like, no, that sounds like this.
Exactly.
Well, I like that, but I don't want anybody to say that it sounds like this.
Yeah.
So I'm going to change it to be this.
Be something else.
You know what I mean? And then you start screwing around with the DNA of it.
And then it goes somewhere
And then
else.
it's no good anymore.
Yeah.
Then it's no good.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. I mean, obviously you don't want to plagiarize somebody. I mean, I don't sit there and say, if I'm going to play a part, like I want this to be exactly like, Paperback Writer or whatever Beatles song.
Yeah.
But I'll think of it in my head of a reference. And we do this with every studio musician we worked with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, hey, we want this to be kind of like Magical Mystery Tour. That's what kind of things we want.
This is where your inspiration.
Yeah. Or we want it to be Beatle, like a drummer a lot of times. I want this to be like Levon Helm. I want this to be like Ringo Starr, or James Gadsden, or whatever the groove might be that you're looking for.
Yeah.
So you're referencing things all the time, and that's
Sometimes
part of one of the of a good musician, good studio musician, is that ability to have that vocabulary to know who the hell Levon Helm is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what he plays like.
Yep.
And so I can say,
and not only reference it, but be able to point to.
Yeah.
And
then you listen to it and you're like, okay, I could hear it. Because like you'll work with you or somebody else of the the crew that I mentioned, and it's like, well, it could be that it could be like a Levon thing, or maybe it could be more like, it could be more straighter, like a Charlie Watts Stones thing. I'm talking about drums, but
yeah,
you can sit there and hear a song and it's just acoustic guitar and playing it, and a good musician could say, I could do this 3-4 different ways.
Yep, absolutely.
Immediately.
Yeah.
Because they have that vocabulary. They spent their life listening to it and kind of like dissecting it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So they know the elements that they can pull out of. And so that's stealing.
Yeah, but I think it's also like there's only so many notes on a staff, and there's only so many ways you could play it, right? And I think when you first brought that reference to me as like a good musician borrows and a great musician steals, is like you almost get in your own way when you start thinking like, oh well, this kind of reminds me of something else, or it sounds just like this, so I got to throw it out. And as you said, like as soon as you take that initial inherent like instinct, and you're just like, nope, can't do that because it reminds me of somebody else's song, I think it's a detriment to yourself. And the way I looked at it was, I think when we first started talking and when you brought that reference to me, I was messing around with writing some of my own songs. I was like, does it sound too much like this or that? And you stopped me in my tracks. It's like, well, if it sounds like that, it's because that's, you either have an influence from something, whether you're stealing it or I shouldn't say stealing it, but intentionally pulling from that or not, and you're making it your own. So, and then even when we're talking about like the studio sessions where I come in off of something else, like there's a lot of times where I'll start to play like a motif and I'm like, it kind of reminds me of this song or whatever. And it's like, you can almost look at it as paying tribute to something in your repertoire. Sure. Versus like, I'm not going out there to intentionally be like, I'm going to take this line from this particular song and drop it in here because I feel like it feels right. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, you can do all sorts of things with that whole form. Like, for instance, like I could say, if I'm going to write a song, and I could say like Strawberry Fields Forever.
Yeah.
Let me take you down because I'm going to Strawberry Fields. Nothing is real. Nothing to get hung about. Strawberry Fields Forever.
Yeah.
Right. The first verse. So you say, okay, let me tell you, I'm going to Strawberry Fields. Okay, so the second line is the title. Nothing is real. The next line rhymes with the second line. And then Nothing to Get Hung About. Strawberry Fields Forever is the title of the song. That's the stanza.
Yeah.
Then you can just like take the words out, take the music out, make it in minor, and you can just kind of lose that form. Use that form. Okay, line 1, line 2 is, just doesn't rhyme, just kind of random. Then the title of the song, then the next line rhymes with that, and then you can build songs that way. And it doesn't really. Basically, you've like ripped off all the crown molding and all the curtains and everything. You're just dealing with the framing,
foundation. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you can write song. That's a good way when you're stuck to use the framing of something else to create something new.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't do that all the time. Sometimes I just write, most of the time I just write, but sometimes you'll take something and rip it apart and do things like that. And then the other thing too is like, you're looking at it from a standpoint of, okay, you're drawing off of whatever, Rod Stewart.
Yeah.
Rod Stewart got it from somewhere.
Yep.
Rod Stewart ripped somebody off.
It all came from
what I mean? And in a way, it's all one big song over time.
Yeah.
What wasn't it like? Was it Mozart with the 12-bar form? Is that correct?
For blues and all?
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think it is Mozart. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like a lot of this, and like different things, and that's in all aspects of life. I mean, wasn't it? They said that like the width of railroad. The railroad of railroad ties is the same width as like the chariot wheels, like the Roman chariot.
Oh, really?
Like over time. So
yeah,
like these things
it's always
are
coming
vestiges from the past that keep going forward.
And I think my major pull away from that too was like not to get like bogged down in the fact that you might take it for something. Just be creative. Just keep putting something in. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't want to like steal it. It's not a tribute. No. But like you can kind of draw on the elements of, and you put 3 or 4 elements from 3 or 4 different people, and then you've made something new.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't think anything, and also like if you're trying to put something out into the world that somebody can enjoy, their way of enjoying it in most cases is like is their ability to like associate some sort of analogy.
Yeah.
This is kind of like R&B, but it's heavier.
Yep, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Or whatever.
I feel like most people always like go, there's this new band out. It kind of sounds like this guy with a mix of this. You know what I mean? And that's one way or another you're going to fall in.
But they have to be able to relate to it. They like something they're not expecting, so they don't want it to be
exactly
a carbon copy, but something they didn't expect, but something that somehow feels like something they can call familiar.
Absolutely.
On some level.
Yeah.
And then you kind of spread out from there.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting sometimes. I remember like for the first time I was a kid, first time I heard Jimmy Page, and I'm like, and I was like, I heard lots of things like this. Why is everybody, I was a kid, and it's like, because everybody had been ripping him off, like that I was listening to subsequently.
Right, absolutely.
You know what I mean? And I'm like, he was like, an originator in that style.
Of that, yeah.
A pioneer.
Yeah.
A pioneer of that.
Yeah.
So it was like, it's funny, like when you hear all the derivatives of it, then you go back to a source.
And then you could talk to him and figure out where
and then he got it, by, from old blues records and stuff, like all those guys.
Pulled from there.
Yeah, I mean, Keith Richards and, and Jimmy Page and, like all these are, they're all blues heads, I mean, like that listen to American blues. And then, then we're American kids and we listen to British invasion stuff, you know what I mean? And learned how to do it from the Brits. And, and then, kind of goes back and forth.
Yeah.
But,
and then you got Mark Knopfler, who's a Brit who loves to play American style.
Likes to play American. Yeah. So I love that kind of thing. I love that. But we got off.
Oh, I know. I spun us all over the place. Your original question is how I jump into the studio, and I was talking about motifs, and that's how we got off there. Yeah. So to circle back
to the motif.
Yeah, no, a lot of times, and that's where I got into the motif. I was saying, like, sometimes you have an idea, like the one in Life is Beautiful, that we put that in, we build off of it. But then if there's not a motif in there, sometimes I try to think, okay, am I just playing a part for, like if it's more blues country or something, are you looking more for a fiddle sound that doesn't necessarily tie in a motif that we're coming back to like the same hook each time? Are you just looking for like that feel and that style? And I'll do that a lot more with like a fiddle piece, right? So it's we'll play through and I'll kind of borrow from, we were talking about this again the other day, but borrow from the melody of the vocal line and kind of play either around it, under it, harmonize to it, or maybe hook onto something that I played. And if there's that space in between a vocal where they're taking a breath or letting the vocal breathe, can I add something in there that doesn't overshine the vocal, but maybe kind of mimics what the vocal just did? Or maybe it's like a call and response kind of vibe. And then if it's if it's a song that's pretty well structured, then I'm just kind of adding what I call candy to it, just like kind of putting in like little riffs or whatever throughout, because already the guitar might have that line somewhere that I don't have to worry about, echoing elsewhere. So each one, I think I take a different approach to it, and I sit back and listen and kind of figure out what it needs versus what it's missing. And sometimes what I think needs is, we'll get halfway into it and I'm like, no, we don't like that line, or let's do another one. And
sometimes we don't do anything.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just can't fit it in there.
Exactly. And then I remember specifically bringing Jeremy Hummel back in was he was working on a project. I remember it was one of my more frustrating sessions that we had done, because for the life of me, I couldn't put something down. I don't know if we came up with lines and I wasn't being executed correctly. I just remember the feeling I had was I was getting frustrated because I don't even remember if we had other sessions during that day, if I had just come for that one. And we were trying to put down violin lines and that wasn't working. Or my timing didn't feel right, something. And we had to just put it down and walk away. And we came back like a week later, and then I just cruised through it. There was just something. It was just like a mindset, something there that wasn't working, or the song wasn't fitting in my mind somehow.
It wasn't jiving.
Yeah. So sometimes that's the best thing, is like just put it down, walk away, and then let it breathe in your head. And if that's like, you just kind of keep hitting that wall, keep it just like anything else, I assume. But right. Came back to it a week later or whatever it was that we came back together, and all of a sudden it made sense.
Right.
So
no, that's super cool.
Yeah.
It's like I think it's an underrated skill. I think people maybe that play live a lot, like playing live and playing in the studio, are completely different animals.
Absolutely.
It's completely different. It's not just getting together and just playing the song down. You know what I mean? And I always say, it's kind of like, it's the choice, really. I mean, that goes for engineering, producing, anything. It's not like the best guys that I've ever had the opportunity to work with or to sit in a room with and watch work, it doesn't look like they're doing anything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really the truth. They don't look like they're doing a damn thing.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just kind of like, an engineer or a producer, engineer walk out there and go, move something over here a little bit. Boom. Completely different deal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And or a producer will like walk out and talk to everybody and go, do. You know what I mean? They'll make a little adjustment. The thing that sucked now is amazing.
It's amazing, yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's just like, and it's like with experience you can do that. And I think that younger people, and I don't want to be like the old guy that bitches about technology or anything like that, but like I think there's like a more they want to just get it all in the box so they can mess with it.
Yeah.
So they can
cut it up, move it around, do whatever,
and like mess with the DNA of what it is. You know what I mean? And I think there's a certain magic to just kind of guys in a room, guys and girls in a room, talking it out.
Yep.
And playing it down, and not really getting too, not looking at a bunch of, like
the
like
grid,
graph, a grid and a graph on a screen, and moving everything into those. You're looking at the music. You're not listening to the music. You know? And that whole thing is. There's certainly styles of music that's really great for.
Yeah.
But
I think that play, and I might be getting ahead of ourselves with maybe where you're going to put the conversation to, but I think a lot of that also plays out into the live element once you put a record in. I feel like, especially in today's world with the technology, with putting tracks and everybody being in ear under click and whatnot, it's like, well, this is the way it was done in the record. Now we have to find a way to replicate that live, and now all of a sudden you're playing to all these tracks. And I've played with tracks in the past, and it's cool to have those extra elements that, like some magic sauce in the background maybe. But I was like listening to the old records, listening to like the record version, and in that moment, like you and I could have the freedom to put in different things that we can't do live. You know what I mean? So there's different elements that you're putting in there, and sounds like taking a guitar and reversing it or something like that you can't necessarily replicate.
Not going to pull them off.
Exactly, yeah. But that's for the record. And then it's like, okay, we have the record version. Now let's come up with another version of like, we want to be able to portray that song in a manner that it's digestible and somebody can listen to it, and you can still make sound big. But obviously we're not going to have all the studio magic tricks that we have in a box. Like, how do we make that an enjoyable live version. And I think there's a little bit of, you were saying, like, not to sound like the old guy in the room, like, I love the modern technology and the tricks. I'm a huge component of like using a lot of that stuff. But I also think there's something to be said for like, let's just take the bare bones of the song and figure out how to make that an amazing thing live as it is. And then maybe you put a couple of hand tricks, but to just have like an entire album or an entire live performance from A to B, just be all in a box with all the tricks, I think you're doing another detriment to yourself. You're getting rid of that same creativity that you had in the studio to create it. Now use that same creativity that you had in the studio to make that, find out how to be creative and make something magic happen stage.
Different magic.
Yeah, exactly. Live.
It's like the difference between like watching a film or a Broadway play. It's kind of like, you know what I mean? They're not the same thing.
Yeah, you're not going to have all those camera studio tricks and all the things that you can do on camera. Yeah, I mean, technology's come far away, but like...
I had the quote I used to say a lot to the bands was, I'm like, when you're making a record, you're making a record. Make the record. Don't worry about...
replicating it live.
How you're going to replicate it. I said, because, the whole point is like, nobody's going to buy your shitty record because you sound just like that live.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's like...
Absolutely.
So you want to make a good record. I mean,
And even... sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, even to that point, like, I think I've told this story before, and not to throw... But I had a girlfriend who loved Maroon 5.
You're right.
And I love a lot of Maroon 5's music, right? Yeah. And I didn't notice it as much. I think there was a part of me that inherently noticed it while it was happening at first, but they happened to be on a tour, and this is early mid 2000s. It was them and Sarah Bareilles opened up for them just when she came out. So she opened up, and then it was a co-headline tour of them and Counting Crows. And I guess every night they switched who was like in which position. Yeah. So Maroon 5 came out, and they killed it in their own way. They and again, not to on Maroon 5, but like it was great. But at the point, like, except for maybe an extended guitar solo here or there, it just sounded like I was listening to the record, live with pyrotechnics, and you could see everybody live. But it was literally like the album that I bought and listened to live on stage in front of me. It was cool to have the experience of seeing them live. But at the same time, I didn't realize it until Counting Crows came out afterwards. And they said, hey, we're going to do something we only do a handful of times on tour, and we're going to do a broken down, like more acoustic listening version of it. And at first I was like, how do you go from Maroon 5 ripping it with pyrotechnics and lights and everything else, and now you're going to come out after them and do a broken down acoustic tour? And all of a sudden, or not tour, but a performance, and all the songs that, and I wasn't even a huge Counting Crows fan at that point, but I knew some of their hits, and I knew a lot of the songs they played that night. And to listen to like Mr. Jones and all these songs, and it was just ghosty and completely turned on its head. And like the lead guitarist would play like an electric from time to time, but very clean, open like leads. But the organist the keyboardist had a B3 organ on stage also, and he came out with like an accordion. And it was just such like a creative mix, to the point where I came in a fan of both of them, but walked away going, man, Counting Crows just killed that, versus like, because it was such a stark difference in that moment. And I've seen amazing shows recorded live performances of Maroon 5 since, and I know they can kill it. I'm trying to save my own skin right now, but but I love what they do. But it was such a stark difference in the moment that it was like, here's the record, and they're promoting that record obviously at the moment, but here it is live with maybe an extended guitar solo here, versus Counting Crows coming out and just completely changing all of their songs live without like tracks or anything else behind it. Right. So I think that really stood out to me, is like, hey, you can make a record and promote that record, but for a lot of the guys today who go out and they're like, well, we have all these things going on in the background, we got to get like the pad track, we got to get like the extra percussion elements and all these other things so that you hear them live. But then you kind of put yourself in that box by having to play all of that. Yeah, the same way every single night,
except for unless you have, like you said, the keyboard player.
Yeah, somebody who can kill it. And I really only see that with the funk bands.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's like no room to breathe or change anything, versus like saying, okay, how can we create something? And yeah, you're going to play the same songs, for the most part on a tour, the same, but you have a little bit more of an opportunity to breathe on certain things, or yeah. So
no kidding. Yeah. I think that's great. I think that's awesome. And like we've always been, the shows we play together, it's always very freewheeling.
Absolutely, yeah.
Very freewheeling. I mean, there's not anything preconceived.
Nope.
There's a set list that is mostly adhered to, but not completely.
It's like a song list more than a set list. Here's our, and maybe we put some songs in the same place because of how you want the dynamic of the show to go.
Right.
But at the same point, like even then, and I said this earlier, but like rehearsed structure, or structured improv, is very inherent with a lot of what we do live, because it's like, okay, I know there's a solo coming at this point, and then sometimes we'll play it longer, sometimes we'll play it shorter, and it has that opportunity to breathe. So we know the structure of the song is there, we know where the solo is going to come in, but once we're in that solo, it's just kind of like whatever happens, and take it from there. And
it might be 1 minute long, might be 4.
Yeah. And then also depending on what mood we're in for that day. I always said, like, don't bring your emotions on stage for, like, and I'm sure you've had plenty to say about this in the past and can reference it, but like I used to always say, like, if you got in a car accident, you get broke up with your girlfriend, or you were just handed $1 million, like, don't let that reflect your performance. But it doesn't mean you can't bring that into a certain creative element, because you could play the same song 5 nights in a row, but based off of where your mood is, you could maybe have it influence in the way you play a solo, versus like, you don't want to have like, you broke up with your significant other and all of a sudden it's just written all over your face, right? But if you get to a section of solo, maybe you put a little bit more emotion into that. So let it come out of your fingers or whatever your instrument may be. Versus
you talked about like when you're playing to like a specific person.
Oh, I love that. That's another Mr. P thing. Thanks again, Mr. Perskintis.
Yeah.
I remember when we were, so again, I started in 4th grade. The orchestra went way back prior to that, but one particular performance, he came out, and he may have very well heard this from somebody else, but for me, I point to him, and he goes, I want everybody to pick out a member of the audience. And he says, that's the person you're playing for tonight. Doesn't matter how they react, but that's the person you're playing for. You know what I mean? So it's like, then it made that much more of a connection, and there's,
done that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, now you're playing for somebody else. You're not playing for, and going back to the whole ego thing, it's like, I've worked with some guys in the past, and I'm sure you have as well, where you're halfway through a show and they're like, you know what, the audience just isn't feeling it, so I'm not going to give it to them. And it's like, no, the audience isn't feeling it because you're not giving it to them.
Yeah, you haven't connected with them.
Yeah, and it's like, just because you're not, if they're not giving you anything, like if you're trying to, maybe it's just one person who's a dead fish out there, right?
Sure.
But at the same time, if you're just going to shut down your performance or whatever you're doing because you don't feel like you're getting the energy, I hate that. And like, people are like, oh, I feed off the audience. It's like, yeah, there's a portion of that, right? So if the audience is giving you a lot, like, it's going to amp you up and everything else. Sure. But they're also paying a ticket to come be entertained because they just worked a 9 to 5 or whatever they do.
Yeah, they did, yeah.
Yeah, it's like
some money wrapped up in the evening.
Yeah, it's like, that's, not to make it all about economics, but at the same time, like, that person had their normal day already and they need the escape. So they're coming to you to get that escape from their everyday or whatever, and whether it's good or bad. But they're coming to be entertained and enjoyed. So if you're basing your performance that now it's your time to work and getting, to that mindset, why would you bring a subpar performance to because somebody else isn't giving it to you? Here we go off topic again.
No, that's good. Yeah. I hear what you're saying. I'm kind of, like you said, you were talking about the playing to like a specific person or something like that. I was reminded, like I was like this interview once with the actor, Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah.
He was saying that in his performances, he said he always gave his character some trait that never appears in the movie.
I like that.
You know what I mean? Like the guy hates his sister.
Yeah.
There's never mention. There's never any storyline.
But that's part of the character development.
That's part of like who he is. So that informs, you know what I mean? Like, so if you're like picking, okay, you're playing to this person here or whatever, and then it's kind of like the way that person maybe is reacting is going to inform your performance, but you're playing for 500 people.
Yeah, I love that.
That don't know that's
the person
that's the person you chose.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's what you're saying, which I find pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And so that'll take you, depending on what kind of reaction you get. I mean, it could be your mother, I mean, it doesn't, whatever, like, depend on the reaction you get from the whole audience is basically the little detours that you take in your performance based on, this unknown,
good or bad
guardrails that you put on what you're doing as you're reacting to person.
Absolutely.
Which I think is like super cool. And that's where like the honesty can come in, where you say, hey, you got to play no matter what. And they paid the money. But you can take things left or right or wherever you want to take them based on what
the reaction you're getting,
the reaction you're getting, or where you're coming from on that day.
And not to mention, when you get a good reaction from them, it helps a lot.
Well, that helps, yeah.
But I even think it's cooler when you got somebody who does kind of have that, like, you know, too cool for school, and then all of a sudden you get a smile or a smirk or something like that. Or I'm sure, again, same with you. I've had so many people who come up and I'm like, I was watching this guy all night and he just looks like it, and they come up and that was the greatest performance ever. I was like, go, dude, tell your face, man, because like I had no idea that you were enjoying this at all. But, but they come up, man, you were a great player. This is the greatest show I've seen. I've never seen anything like this. Blah blah blah. And I'm like, man, I'm glad you liked it, because had I based off of what I thought I was getting off you, my performance, then you know, but like I was playing but when you do get somebody like that and you just get a smirk, yeah, man, it's the greatest feeling. So.
Yeah, you turn them around.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's cool.
So,
yeah, man. Well, this has been informative.
I appreciate it. I'm glad.
Mike, I've been doing I learned a lot about the studio side of what we've done 100 times, 1,000 times.
Opening up.
And thousands of gigs we've played together, and you know, basically your approach to that. We're standing next together. You're on. I mean, you're on my side of the stage.
Always on your right side.
You're on my side of the stage. And another quote was what's the quote? I don't know who said this. They said that you know, writing about music is like dancing about architecture. You know what I mean? It's like, so it's really hard to describe the mechanics of how you do what you do.
Yeah.
You know, because so much of it's emotional, and so much of it is
second nature.
And you're not thinking about notes, and you know, you're just it's like just kind of channeling emotions through that little wooden thing and lighting up a crowd. And I've seen you do it thousands of times, and hopefully thousands more if I'm lucky.
I said I'm always happy when I'm standing to the right to you.
All right, buddy. All right, man.
Thanks for
there. It is. Yeah,
I appreciate it.
This podcast was produced by Stone State Entertainment.